Hello everyone, welcome back to Chill Dill Trades, where I break down everything happening in the markets, both from the crypto space and the equity stock market, and I give you both fundamental and technical analysis on what's going on. Thanks for joining me today. If you're here for the first time, please like and subscribe. Appreciate it. We're on the journey to 100 subscribers, and I'll be giving you 1 hour free of technical analysis and support and education to one of the subscribers. But today we're going to be covering the crypto space, and I wanted just to bring a different perspective from what I've been seeing a lot on the internet. There's a lot of bullishness going on, but also a lot of fear, so it's a very confusing place and hard to understand maybe where the crypto space could be headed. But I wanted to give my own perspective, and I've been doing some analysis that I haven't been seeing in a lot of places online, so I want to break that down for you today. So the first thing I want to take a peek at in the crypto space is just, reminding ourselves where we're at in terms of market cap and the growth. So going back to 2013, crypto space was just, barely worth $1 billion. But if we fast forward 8-7 years, we're at almost we're above $1 trillion market cap. So that's insane growth. When we kind of look at the chart, people say we have these cycles in the crypto space. So, we saw a peak here, and we saw some downward and some consolidation. Then we saw another peak here in 2018. And we saw some downward momentum and some consolidation, and now people are saying we're in the next bull run for the crypto space overall. And a lot of people are calling it the halfway mark now that we've pulled back about 40% overall, generally speaking, for the crypto markets. And so we're just going to look at some analysis of if we think we're halfway through the bull market, or if there's more upside or maybe more downside. So after looking at just the growth of the market cap, I also want to look at the growth in the number of cryptocurrencies that we've seen on the market. So in 2013 there were only 66 cryptocurrencies, but when we just forward 8 years, we're at 4,500 cryptocurrencies. That is amazing and exponential growth. I think it's a good thing because I think the growth is helping demystify what crypto is, and people are being educated on things like Bitcoin versus DeFi, which is more like Ethereum, a Cardano. And then even the NFT space, which is a new phenomenon that's gained a lot of popularity over the last couple of years, especially the last year. So it's good that there's a lot of demystification happening. I think that I just made up that word. But I also want to compare it to maybe other things we've seen over on the market. So this kind of growth also, I can compare it to what happened in the 2000s with the growth of the tech companies in the market. We just saw exponential growth in the amount of companies that were going public on the market. So this is like a good comparison in terms of different times in history when we've seen something different happen with technology. Another great example is what's happened recently with the SPACs. So the reverse mergers, a couple years ago there was just 10 or 20 of them. I think this last year we're in the hundreds just in each quarter that were happening in the SPAC space. And so we just want to both, understand the goods that this has done, but also some potential maybe trouble areas when we compare things historically speaking that show some similarities in growth. After this, this is just kind of like a question that I started thinking for myself is the growth in the crypto space, in the amount of both market cap as well as like the exponential growth in the amount of tokens on the market. Is this a good or bad thing? And this is a question I've really been pondering, even when we were up at 60K for Bitcoin, 56K, whatever the peak was. I started asking myself, is this growth a good or bad thing? And I wanted to try to find some graphs and charts to figure out where the crypto space is and if there's any changes happening at a fundamental level. And so the first chart we want to look at is the relationship between Bitcoin and Ethereum. So basically how this chart works is the higher Bitcoin is in terms of growth compared to Ethereum, the chart's going to be at a higher point. So when we go here during the 2017, Bitcoin hit 20K, which was remarkable. I remember it going up when I think I was in one of my economic classes at college, and it went up and it hit that 20K, and it was remarkable because no one ever expected it to have that exponential growth. But basically what this is telling us is Bitcoin grew at a much bigger percentage than Ethereum did. So the top part of the division, so Ethereum divided by Ethereum, Bitcoin grew much higher than Ethereum did. And so this is kind of the relationship we see. You know, obviously there were some crashes that distort the relationship a little bit. But then we also have these periods of when altcoins run, and Ethereum, you know, debating whether it's considered an altcoin, but we'll just throw it in that market or that space. And so like when we look back here around the beginning of 2021, just to fast forward, you know, we've had this crazy alt run that basically started in about the beginning of the year. And what we saw was we started seeing Ethereum in that formula. Instead of Bitcoin growing at a higher rate, we started seeing Ethereum and other altcoins growing at a higher rate or growing faster than Bitcoin. And so what that causes is that causes this relationship and this price to go lower. And so this is something that I've started to identify as a very important thing, because we're getting close to all-time lows in this relationship. And so this is something that's really, I think, important to analyze and to think around, because you have to start considering, is the crypto space changing? I think that's one thing we have to think about. Or is this showing us that the alt run is over and Bitcoin is going to start moving? Or there's maybe some other scenarios that we'll get to, but this is the relationship we want to start thinking about. Okay, we're about at all-time lows in this relationship. Are we headed higher? If we're headed higher, that means Bitcoin is significantly going to outperform Ethereum and other altcoins. I just put to a very similar graph or chart to show the relationship between Bitcoin and ADA, Cardano. And so the same thing here is that we see it kind of testing those all-time lows area. The altcoin, you know, ADA has had an amazing run this year, coming from, you know, 10 to 20 cents to up to $2.50. And we see that reflected in this graph where, you know, ADA has just so much outperformed Bitcoin in growth and a growth percentage. And this is what we see on the graph. And so I think seeing a similarity in both Ethereum and ADA, this shows us that something is shaking in the space. And so let's look at some potential scenarios of what could happen next based on the data that we're analyzing in these graphs and these charts. So here's a couple scenarios I just put together. See if I can change more of my faces real quick. Hopefully you still see that. Oops, sorry. I went ahead. There we go. My face is back. I gave you a little sneak peek at my next slide. But here's a couple of scenarios that we're looking at in terms of what could happen next due to how low that relationship is on the graph. And so the first thing is maybe the crypto space is changing. You know, maybe Bitcoin has lost a lot of its oomph because there's so many new tokens on the market. You know, we saw that grow from just 66 back in 2017 to over 4,500 in 2021. And maybe that delusion, or not delusion, but there being so many more cryptocurrencies on the market is pulling some of the purchasing power away from Bitcoin and going into the altcoins. And so maybe we'll just see that relationship continue to kind of go at those lower levels or go even lower. That's the first thing. And that's going to be really important how you choose your decisions. If we do see that relationship in that graph continue to go lower, is altcoins are going to be a better investment in the long term in terms of your returns on what you're putting into something. So this is where I'm going to start looking at the ADAs of the world, you know, with some other projects. I mean, even Ethereum, I'm trying to think of some other projects off the top of my head I like. But this is something that we have to start considering in the relationship. The next potential situation is that Bitcoin goes on a run when altcoins consolidate. So this would be kind of like, okay, the alt season's over and it's time for Bitcoin to take over. And if Bitcoin goes up and altcoins consolidate, what we'll see on those charts that I showed is it to go back up, which historically speaking is what we've seen. It goes up, it comes down, it goes up, it comes down. And that just shows us that potentially the next stage would be Bitcoin to outperform altcoins. The third scenario is that Bitcoin consolidates, but altcoins move lower. And so this, very similar to the last example, this would mean the graph goes up. Because what we're seeing is the denominator price get lower, which would bring the graph higher. So this is another thing to consider is, you know, maybe altcoins have just moved too aggressive. You know, if you look at some of them like ADA, I think it's still up over 1,000%. Ethereum, I think it's up like 700%. So these things have moved drastically. This is, I'm saying the last year. Sorry for context. Around the last year, this is the percentage points that are up. That's an insane growth in 1 year. And so maybe these need to pull back further and Bitcoin needs to consolidate a little bit to bring up the price on that chart that we showed. And the last thing, which is, a lot of people probably won't like this, but maybe the whole market needs to move lower and altcoins actually need to sell off more than Bitcoin on a percentage basis. And again, this would bring that relationship higher in the graph, and we would start seeing it go upwards. Obviously, that would not necessarily what a lot of people want to hear, but this is a possibility. And I want to bring this last scenario into my next point. So kind of as I earlier compared, the growth in the amount of cryptocurrencies on the market, similar to what we saw in the dot-com bubble, which we saw, hundreds of tech companies came to thousands of tech companies. And the same thing with the SPAC space. We saw hundreds of SPACs or tens of 20s of SPACs grow to hundreds of SPACs over a short period of time. And what we see typically is when things grow at exponential rates and the prices still go up, eventually there needs to be a large correction to bring more health to that market. And so maybe crypto needs a real crash to survive in the long term. And so like the dot-com bubble crash, this actually helps successful companies differentiate themselves from the BS companies. And so to give an example, Amazon. So during the dot-com bubble, Amazon crashed just like everything else did. And as earlier I was kind of I'll compare Amazon to Bitcoin in terms of maybe their space in the stock market versus the crypto space. And so even the best of companies and the best of potential companies crashed during the dot-com bubble, but with that crash, also all the shitty companies that basically never existed again also crashed during the dot-com bubble. And so maybe that's what we need to see. We actually need to see the Doge coins and the Shiba coins and everything just go to zero. And in theory, what that's going to do is that's going to bring more money and stop distracting investors from the so-so projects into the more legit projects. And what this is actually going to do, this is actually going to help the market in the long term. Because kind of that relationship of that graph that we looked at is where we saw it headed low and testing the lows. A crash would actually push money into the legit projects, and it would start probably increasing that relationship on that graph. And this is just something that is super speculative. Who knows if it's going to work, but this is something we have to start thinking about as we're comparing the crypto space to other historical times in history. So these are just a couple points that I kind of pulled together, watch it over and over and kind of get my perspective, because I know it got a little technical, but these are real thoughts, and I hadn't heard a lot of people talking about these scenarios, so this is something to consider. So I'm really curious, where do you think the crypto market is headed? Do you think any of those 4 scenarios are realistic? Do you think we're going to get a crypto crash kind of like we did with the dot-com bubble? I'd really love to know what you think in your feedback in the comments below. But thanks for watching this whole video if you made it this far. It's a little bit shorter than the typical 15 minutes, and I tried to do that on purpose. But I appreciate you watching the video. Please subscribe. Please like. When you like and you subscribe, it shows me that you like this content, and I'll keep it coming, making 3 to 5 videos a week. But thank you again, everyone, and I'll talk to you again soon.